Welcome to the Wholesome Remark radio station. Listen, share, follow. Be part of the journey. Listen to things from cryptozoology, UFO, comedy, music, interviews, Freddy the Freak Horror Show, and much, much more. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the Wholesome Remark podcast show, and tonight I am talking to Marilynn Hughes, who founded the Outer Body Travel Foundation in 2003. The mission reduced spiritual and physical hunger worldwide. Has written 100 books and probably more since then, 40 magazines, 18 CDs on outer body travel and comparative religiosism. These books, along with accommodating music and art, are available for free download. She experienced and researched and written and talked about outer body travel and mysticism since 1987, has appeared on innumerable radio and not radio, but she could do radio, I don't know, and television programs discuss the thousands of out-of-body experiences. And she has the foundation. She is the author, first and only English language encyclopedia of ancient sacred texts, the voice of prophets, wisdom of the ages, in 12 volumes. She's featured on the documentary film The Road to Armageddon, a spiritual documentary, have been viewed all over by over 500,000 people. She's been included in the Encyclopedia of the Unseen World, the extraplanetary experiences, alien human contact and expansion consciousness, and has been the subject of a scientific study on outer body experience, a subject of several research studies. She spent 2 years on our original board of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial experience and very much more. I probably have a list longer than I could have a podcast. Hi, man. I think that's true. I think I could say. I think you wouldn't disagree on that point.
Yeah, I think I could agree with that. Yeah.
Now, how and when did you experience your first out-of-body experience?
Well, that would have been, ironically, when I was about 9 years old. And at that time, I experienced a pretty extensive, very, very beautiful experience, which was pretty much a foreshadowing to let me know that I would have this return to me later in life and that there would be a purpose to it. And so then my first out-of-body experience in my adulthood occurred when I was at the age of 22. And that was a good, 32 years ago, I think now. So, boy, it's expanded so much over the years. Really has.
Now, what would you say is explain to people what an out experience is? Because there's obviously perceptions from Hollywood and what you see in television programs, and obviously sometimes they don't relate it as well because obviously restrictions of how they have to show things.
Yeah, there are different variations when you see it done in film or Hollywood versions. Some are more accurate than others. But a genuine out-of-body experience is, I guess the simple way to describe is when the spirit, the soul, detaches from the physical body and is then able to travel outside of that physical shell. Most people will start with traveling, just around their body in the room, and then that will progress to moving around like the house, through windows, and in what I call third and fourth realm travel, which is what is, if you're going to be really particular about words, astral travel, because the astral realm refers to the fourth dimensional travel, whereas out-of-body travel can be referring to any level of travel. So it could be in any of the infinite realms above, below, or in between. And there is an infinite number of spiritual realms that you can travel, and there are many, many, many corridors and tunnels and other frequency means that we take to travel between these different realms and these different dimensions. So, in essence, the basic thing is when the spirit is separating from the physical body, and but out-of-body travel can take on many forms, from a very basic experience of someone seeing their body down below, to someone having a truly profound vision of God, or being taken into a past life, from being taken into any of the heavens, hells, or purgatories. It's very, very wide, expansive possibilities as to what it can take once you are out of your body. And that's part of the reason there's so many books that I've written, because it is such a really vast world that you're experiencing and traveling through.
Yeah. Do you think that certain religions can tap into this as well? Because some religions actively seek to achieve out-of-body experiences.
Oh yeah, the mystical experience is very much akin to out-of-body experiences, and that is something that you see in most of our world religions, and you see it in our tribal religions as well. You can look at, for instance, in Christianity, especially in Catholicism, there is a huge body of knowledge in mystical theology in Catholicism. When you have a huge body of mystics in the church, like St. Catherine of Siena, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and there's many, many more. St. Bridget of Sweden is one as well, but there's many, hundreds literally. But then, like in the Islamic tradition, it's the Sufis that follow the mystic path, and so they have their own unique way that they do so. In Judaism, it's the Kabbalistic Jews that often follow a mystic path. In Hinduism, mysticism is pretty much part of their religion. In Buddhism, it is also a part and parcel of the religion as well. It's, in Hinduism and Buddhism, it's sometimes seen differently because there's more of a meditative focus, and sometimes practitioners, there can be either a bringing together, where there's a mixture of the deep meditative experiences that sometimes lead to out-of-body experiences, or a separation, depending on the understanding of the practitioner. And in tribal religions, medicine men and women from throughout all the ages have utilized mysticism from the beginning of time, literally all the way back through Stone Age religion. So it is something that is very much a part of religious tradition, as well as something that is now being studied, ironically, scientifically, because science is starting to realize that states of consciousness are real, and it has value not only to human development, human function, human well-being, but also to creativity, to even the necessary things that we as human beings need. When we're a good example would be, we have discovered, that human beings, if they go without sleep, are within a very short amount of time, they become unable to function. Part of the reason for that is, the the body and the brain needs its rest. But the other part of it is that, when people are sleeping at night, there is this spiritual process, and this keeps us balanced between the worlds. The spiritual process involves out-of-body travel. Not every one of us is aware of the fact that we are traveling. Not everybody remembers it. But there are a great many more people who are remembering it now than ever before. And we're obviously also seeing that in the near-death community, because we do have so many people recovering from very serious injuries and illnesses who are coming back from being close to death, who have near-death encounters as well. So they're bringing back memories of these kinds of experiences as well.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier before we came on to I had a near-death experience myself, and I had a blood sugar 124 at the time they took it, and then straight to ED, straight to ICU, induced coma. My wife was told I was going to die by the doctors. Only thing I can remember is hearing a woman's voice I've not heard before or since. I'm telling me to wake up. I have an overwhelming feeling I've ever had to wake up. And I do seriously believe that was my spirit guide or guardian angel. I know there's lots of theories that prove that it probably could be, but I do believe that myself. And I also believe that I was experiencing something similar to out-of-body experience by not being in the real world or the next world.
Yes. And a lot of people do have interesting experiences that are unique to people in a coma. That would be an interesting, area to study, specifically patients who've been in comas, and how their experiences differ from traditional NDEs. But yeah, I've heard from a lot of people who've been in a coma, and they have some interesting variations on their experiences,
But definitely made me more aware of religion. I was never ultimately religious before I had it. But after it, I became very more spiritually aware. I suppose because my mortality was questioned, obviously, so I suppose that does make you more aware of it. But I was not as interested before then.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting human phenomenon that many of us kind of do go through life kind of asleep to our mortality until a certain moment. And, and different things will awaken each of us to an interest in these types of supernatural or paranormal type events. And for some it's an NDE, and sometimes it's just facing mortality alone. Some people become more interested. They don't necessarily have a near-death experience, but because they face their mortality, there is almost what I see sometimes is the period before becomes almost like with the lights turned off, and then at some point something switches those lights on, and it's when the lights are turned on, and there's all of a sudden this great interest in all things spiritual, that you see with a lot of people. It's that awakening moment, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've always had these abilities in us. I think that I've had a long theory that it's nothing new. That when ancient man was around, that we've underestimated their intelligence for one, and B, because we had to be more aware of our environment, because the next minute you might meet a mammoth around the corner and might gonna trample you to death. So you had to be more aware of everything around you, all your surroundings. So you was more in tune with nature and the spirituality of things. Because nobody told the cavemen why they should bury someone. I mean, they could have just left the person there. They could have just left them there and walked away.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, what's interesting about you bringing that up, too, is definitely we know that to be true in the sense of looking at the ancient sacred texts. You mentioned that I'd written the Encyclopedia of Ancient Sacred Texts, The Voice of the Prophets. Another thing that I've done, you know, obviously even in order to write that was, you know, I've compiled a library in my home of, you know, probably around 5,000 different ancient sacred texts going all the way back, you know, some going all the way back supposedly 20,000, 40,000 years. I would say to be probably to stay within, you know, maybe let's say 5,000. We know where ancient Egypt was for sure, but some of these things are, you know, purported to be even older, but we don't know for sure, so we'll just stick with that time frame. But what we find is that these kinds of mystical and out-of-body experiences are reported in those ancient sacred texts all the way back. And one of the things I think we definitely really misjudge about ancient man as well as our predecessors all throughout history, especially in this generation because of, you know, all the technology that we have, we forget that when you look back at, go back to the caveman, we'll just talk about the caveman because he made some excellent points about even just primitive man as they became very much in attunement with nature and all of those things. But we forget they lived in silence. You know, by the very necessity of their lives, they did what the desert mystics would do maybe 5,000 years later, you know, maybe 20,000 years later. I don't know exactly what the time frame on that is. But they did what other people would have done, you know, many thousands of years later intentionally to try to connect with the spiritual world and go out into the desert and live in caves and live an ascetic life, so that they could, you know, commune with the spirit world. The primitive man, they did that just by the very nature of their existence. That was their life. So we forget that their very life was almost set up to have somewhat of a primordial context to this spiritual connection. You would assume that there would have been more of a spiritual connection. And sometimes even when you look at some of the ancient sacred texts and some of the sacred writings and also writings of the mystics throughout the ages, when you pause to just ponder the different time frames that they lived in and the different eras and the different circumstances, one of the biggest obstacles to true spiritual advancement in the modern age is the technology, the noise that people have that causes distractions of so many kinds that just weren't there for these people. And what you'll see in some of these ancient writings is a depth of the spiritual experience that many people today would have a hard time even understanding or relating to, and even much harder to actually achieve that state unless they were to truly turn all their devices off and enter into the silence as well. But it was a natural condition for primitive man. And for many thousands of years, I mean, literally up until a couple of hundred years ago, you know, television and radio were invented in the 20th century. Going back to the 1800s would probably be a nice quiet century as well, where people had the benefits of quiet contemplation being a part of their life, their daily life, kind of, whether they liked it or not, whether they wanted to or not, it was kind of there and available to them. Whereas in our age, we have to make an effort to create that if we are genuinely interested in that spiritual development, because the constant distractions of the technology, definitely the noise of it, the distraction of it, all of that can definitely impair our ability to touch into that spiritual world, not to mention, like what you mentioned about being in touch with the natural world like primitive man was, because that's so very true. They quietly became part of that natural ecosystem like all of the other animal species did at the time. Something that we as modern man, not all of us, but there are many who do live close to the land. I used to live in Colorado until about 2 years ago, and there are people who do that, but a good majority of people do have some disconnection with the earth in that way now.
I also think we are genetically mutating as well, without people realizing it. I think if you look at most boys now, by the time they're 12, 13, they're about 6 foot plus, most boys. Girls are developing at a far earlier age, between 12 and 13, they're developing more or less. And I think with technology, most people are losing the art of communication.
Yeah, that's very true. Totally agree with you. The ability to communicate face to face, and the deeper communication one-on-one, and the type of communal, societal relationships that I still even remember that type of stuff when I was younger, because I'm 54, so I'm a pre-internet person. So I remember growing up in the 70s. So you remember when that was still part of our families and our family extensions of the neighborhood and the friends and the acquaintances and and so yes, I agree with that very much. Yeah, it does change, and there's good things about the way that the technology has impacted, but we have to be very, very aware that there's also negative things that absolutely impact us in ways socially, like you're saying, but they also will impact us spiritually very, very profoundly if we don't make the effort to identify, and then we have to discipline ourselves to utilize the technology for those things which are good, but then deal with the addictive nature of it. We have to turn stuff off and enter into the silence and allow things to be silent.
I'm looking at your web site. I see you do a lot of charitable projects.
Yeah. We started out, ironically, in 2003, and I started out going a lot on what Mother Teresa had said, where she said that the spiritual poverty that she saw in the West was worse than the physical poverty she saw in the East. And so we started with the idea of reducing spiritual poverty worldwide, and we, a big part of that was making all of our books and things that we do. I have CDs and artwork and stuff as well, but it's all available for download for free, and that's part of reducing spiritual hunger worldwide, making it available to anyone, anywhere. But in 2004, that huge tsunami hit Indonesia, and that's when we started with the idea that we also need to do what we can with physical hunger, because the reality is that those people who do live in parts of the world who are impoverished or do not have water, sanitation, or obviously food, when you live in that manner, you certainly don't have the space, time, or energy left after just dealing with survival issues to be dealing with your spirituality. And so if we want to really address the spiritual journey, we also have to address helping people to be in a place where they actually have room for that in their lives. And when people are living in poverty, that's just not possible. And one of the big things that we really embraced, I believe it was in 2012 when the United Nations declared that it was water and sanitation, which was the two biggest issues in third world countries, to bringing them to a more of a first world status. So we started focusing a lot on drilling wells and building sanitation projects. And so we did a lot of that. We built a lot of homes in places. And we've done a lot of other things like, buying livestock and other things. And so what we do is we raise money from our readers and other people who are interested in gifting the foundation for the charitable projects. And also we have always donated from whatever proceeds we receive from our royalties on, our books. We have them available in Audible and Kindle and paperback and all the electronic forms. And so whatever, income we bring in through royalties for a good many years, we often we'll take as much of those proceeds as we can after paying expenses for, keeping things going. We will try to, fund some projects around the world. One year we focused a lot on helping a hospital project in Central America. And so there's a lot of different things. After the earthquake in Haiti, we were able to help get a well up outside of Port-au-Prince, which was a real victory. That was a difficult thing to do after the earthquake. And so we try to create as many opportunities as we can like these, just because we know that the spiritual progress of human beings is often also very directly correlated to, them having their basic needs met.
Well, I think it's very important that even if you can only give the smallest amount of help, even if it's a bit of guidance or give somebody a little treat they wouldn't normally have, or it doesn't have to be the biggest gesture sometimes. If you can do a big gesture, good. But sometimes you're not always capable of doing the big gestures. So
Right,
even the
exactly.
smallest ones can make a difference to people's lives.
Well, and it's always, we bring together all of the small gestures that we all bring together, comes together in the bigger, the bigger consciousness of humanity, and it's all, so everything from smiling at others when we're out and about, even that simple, so yes, I totally agree, because it's so important that people realize that it's not always about financial giving. A lot of times it's, giving someone a shoulder to cry on, giving someone a smile, giving someone a positive word of encouragement, or just someone to listen to them.
And
You know what I
sometimes
mean?
people just need a bit, they might be going through some personal rubbish, and sometimes you just go, no,
Yeah.
you are a valid person, you are valuable, you are who you are meant to be who you're meant to be, and don't let anybody else tell you any different.
Right. Yeah, and it's always, it's always so important that I find this really important at the Out of Body Travel Foundation too, because we hear from a lot of people who are going through difficult times. A lot of people find us when they're going through grief, or other life altering moments in their lives. That's why they're seeking something spiritual. And it's so important for all of us to be aware of how important it is for us to be sensitive when people are going through difficult periods, to be present, to be sensitive, and to be non-judgmental, to allow the person to feel whatever it is that they feel, and to be able to feel safe in whatever they're going through and not being judged about it, is so important, because sometimes when people are going through rough stuff, they feel things sometimes they feel things they never thought they would feel, and then they feel guilty about it. They're like, I don't know if I should feel this way, and and especially when people are grieving really serious losses or just going through something difficult, they get hit with unexpected emotions. They get hit with unexpected consequences to things in life, or people do go through most of us will go through periods where we are legitimately being persecuted by someone or something in our lives, and that can be very shocking to their psyche, and it's important that they feel just supported as they're trying to navigate through those waters. A lot of it is just loving kindness, like the Dalai Lama talks a lot about and teaches, and the Tibetan monks, the Buddhist monks, is generating loving kindness to our brothers and sisters as they're going through whatever they're going through, rather than giving other people more reason to feel like they have to isolate themselves or make them feel like they are somehow set apart. Like, what's happening to me is, one of the most comforting things that I find that people seem to find the most comforting. Sorry, that was repetitive, but is when they realize that, because I receive so many emails and stuff from people around the world, and have for many years, and when people send me an email about something they're going through, and I can honestly tell them, this is not unusual. I've heard this from many other people. You are not alone in this. That's very comforting to most of us as human beings, I think, to realize that our experiences are not isolated and we're just unusually bad at handling something, or
we're basically we're a social animal. Although people don't say we're not, we are a social animal, right? Because whatever theory you want to believe, we did come from apes originally, and apes are very sociable animals. So when we're out of that social environment, we don't thrive.
Right. And it just really, a lot of, and that's really kind of like what the loving kindness practice is about. But this is also it's a practice that, Christians practice, and, basically every faith practices it in their own way, which is just be present. Be present for one another. And when we do that, and we be present for one another, and we try to do so without feeling the need to judge anyone's experience, and also allowing for the fact that each person experiences everything in their own unique way, but there's also similarities in the way we experience similar and different events. And so we can find the community in that in terms of the things that many people feel, and we can also find the individuality in that. And by being a quiet listener, so to speak, that, it's for whatever reason, and I'm curious what your take on this is, Mark, just because, but it's one of the things that I see with a lot of people who write to me, that they're so afraid of being judged. And,
well, I think it depends on what you've experienced in life, because I was at school, I was kept behind for a year, so I've always had the sense of that need to catch up, Bill. I'm always behind, I feel less intelligent sometimes, but I know what that stems from. I have always had OCD, I have anxiety problems, I have them at the moment. I'm dealing with small vessel disease of the brain, but I think I always had a philosophy when I was in care. I used to work with mental health. I knew their problems, but I always used the philosophy of dealing with the person as a person. And I always seemed to get better that way, better results. Of course they were ill, but you had brilliant days where you had conversations like we're having now. And people always say, oh, how can I have a conversation with someone who's mentally ill? And you say when they're lucid, which is, I don't really like that term, but it's the term they use, that you can have wonderful days and wonderful conversations, and when they're having really bad days, you can just think, oh, well, I'm just having a bad day today.
I think that's a really good way to approach it, too. And, I've studied a lot of the mental health practices, and I use it in the spiritual counseling that I give to people. And one of the things that I also see, I see two very strong elements with people in the emails that I receive, and stuff is I see that people are very afraid to approach even their closest friends and family about certain things. They feel like they're going to be judged. And then they're also so afraid that they could never be forgiven for something. There's always something that they feel like they could never be forgiven for. And so many times it's not something that at least I would never think, oh gosh, that's so unforgivable. It's usually something that would be like, well, of course you can be forgiven for that. You're a human being. It's a minor failing. We all have them,
Yeah.
But it seems to be a very common human thing that I see, and
well,
I think if we can try to help each other with that.
Well, I try to break the barriers because I try to talk to people about taboo subjects. I talked to a lady yesterday about how to deal with sexual abuse with in kids, and how the kids should learn how predators' minds work. And I was saying that when I used to work with paedophiles, the best way I used to treat them was to treat them as normal people. And people used to say, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, that's what they want. They want to be treated different because that gives them the power. It's all about power, being manipulative. They're very clever people. You never underestimate them for a second. And at the end of the day, if it's your job to look after someone, you look after them. You may not agree with what they are or what they do, but you can't say, "Oh, I won't look after you because of that or that," because you'll never survive in care work.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and so what it comes down to is that, we all have our weaknesses and our failings, and we have our strengths. And I think, as human beings, we're so afraid that people will discover our weaknesses and our failings. But what I also find is that it's such a relief to people when they finally realize that when people do find out, or like when they share with me and they find out that really isn't a big deal that they shared it with me, and that they're really just fine and they're not as bad as they thought. It's like a weight coming off of their shoulders.
I see on your page you do a series of course of study, and you've got, well, I wouldn't like to say how many lot. You cover from aliens to you name it. There's probably on it.
Yeah, it covers. It starts with some basic understandings of mysticism and consciousness, and it goes into some deep understandings of some of the mysteries of Catholicism. Then it goes into deep study into world religion, and then into out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, and then also, and as you're going to be also doing some meditations that involve things like the Monroe Institute's Hemi-Sync and their voyage journeys. I'm not getting the name right, but those are on there, as well as also some binaural beats, things like this, but then you're also going to be learning some Catholic prayers and also how to pray the Liturgy of the Hours. You're going to learn about monastic life, which is the life of the nuns and the monks, because it's very helpful in how to lead kind of a silent life, which is helpful in terms of the spiritual development and out-of-body travel. And, of course, we go into, as you said, aliens. And we also include on there some interesting meditations that Dr. Stephen Greer is doing to make contact with the higher alien species that he's doing. He's doing some very interesting work now, making contact with some of the higher forms, some of the higher life forms of the aliens, because we have different races out there.
Oh yes, I've found all this out. I've talked to very intelligent people in this field, and I know a lady in Czechoslovakia. I don't know if you've heard of her. Heard of them? They're two sisters, and he talked to an alien called EBE or A.
I don't know if I have.
And the last name is
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and the last name is Poliskia. I probably going to pronounce it wrong, but I know him fairly well, and it's very interesting. It's a fascinating subject. I know people say, "Oh well, you're not really talking to aliens." I thought, well, how do we know? I mean, there's a lot of theory.
You'd be surprised. A big part of out-of-body travel often involves contact with alien.
Because they probably would find it easier to talk to people in that environment, because they can appear to us in a way we might accept them better.
Well, sure, but also in the out-of-body travel state, since you can travel multidimensionally, and some of especially the higher species, they actually move around fifth dimensionally, so you're going to see them there. That's where you're going to see them. Sometimes you're going to get an opportunity to either travel on their craft or see their craft, and oftentimes you'll get an opportunity to interact with them, see what they look like, learn a little bit about their civilization. I've had opportunities to be taken to different civilizations to learn about some of these different forms. And I've been, also shown some of the other forms that we have to be a little more careful of, who are more mortal beings as well. But even with the course of study, then you continue. You're going to go through doing a portion of it is on the alien question and doing these alien meditations, and then you're going to go into a little bit of remote viewing. And then you're going to go back into some Catholic mysticism, learn a little bit about the stigmata and St. Padre Pio. Then you're going to go back into quantum hologram theory with Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And you're going to be taken into a comparative where you're going to compare the experience of St. Padre Pio with the experience of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was an Apollo astronaut.
Yeah, yeah.
See how fascinatingly
It is very, very fascinating. Yes, it's a very. People don't realise how much of a deep world it is when they say, "Oh well, it's just this and this." I thought, no, it's a lot more than that. It's like I'm a great believer. I know you've studied a lot of religious education. I think sometimes, Christ was a prophet. But at the time of writing, people writing, I think what was written was sometimes redirected, because I know one of the Roman emperors didn't he change it? What I've read, what I saw in a documentary about women in the Bible, he basically took them out, certain women out of the Bible.
I'm not sure that I saw that documentary you're referring to.
It's called The Female Disciples. It was on a British Channel 4 program.
Oh, okay. That sounds fascinating.
It was. If I can find it for you, I'll send you the link, but I don't know if it's still available, but it was very interesting.
Well, the difference, though, and I can tell you this ironically because, of course, the status of who Christ is was, a big part of my interest in the earlier parts of my journey, and I was taken very specifically to have that answer given to me in a very profound out-of-body experience I had, where it was shown the difference between his station and that of the prophets. And, his station was that of a Messiah, which is a deliverer. Whereas the prophets have a different function. It's prophesying. It's informational, whereas Jesus is, as Messiah, it's a very different function, and it is a higher function than the prophets. Now, in the experiences that I've had in the out-of-body travel state, there is what I call the royal family of God, and it literally is the prophets, saints, mystics, and sages, and ascetics, and all of them from throughout history, throughout the world, and throughout world faiths and traditions, and all throughout time. And they all work together for the redemption of humankind. And Christ is the head of that royal family of God. But Christ and the Buddha and Krishna, they all work together, but Christ is still a station above them. And if you go into some of these higher spaces in the heavenly realms, the cities of New Jerusalem and above, and there's many higher realms and dimensions. Christ is, Christ has dominion over those worlds. He is who he said he was. He is Lord, Prophet, Savior, King, Messiah, all of those things. So I think it's hard for people to understand unless they've seen it. But we see this as well in near-death literature. If you see how many people have seen Christ in their experiences, and this is revealed to them.
I would say I felt like I touched something. I wouldn't say what it was, but it did feel different. I don't think I was like fully there. And I think, like you say, I honestly think like there's a clock. Like once your time's up, it's up. Like, yeah. I know that's a bit basic, but I think that's true. And I think that your spirit is taken away from your body because I think I've experienced this because when I was in care work, we had to go in a room where this lady was dying, unfortunately. And when she died, we could physically see that her body changed physically straight away. We didn't see nothing rise up or anything like that, but her whole demeanour changed in a second.
And how did it change?
Is it something from her had left her? The essence of her had gone.
Oh, okay. So when you felt her spirit leave.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say, I'm not 100% certain because obviously I'm reflecting back on it, and obviously when you reflect back on things, sometimes your memory's not as great as it should be, but...
Right. I relate, yeah. Well, and I've heard of many people talk about that experience as well as, I've experienced things similar to that as well. I used to work at the Catholic Church, and so we handled quite a few funerals, and we were there for a lot of people who were, very sick. And one of the things you also see is that when people are nearing death, they would often have some kind of vision a few days up to a week before, where they would be given some type of comfort, and after that point, they were totally at peace.
Get a good day, I call it. They have a good day.
The good day.
Yeah, but it's true. It's not scientifically proven, and a lot of doctors say it's not true. But I've talked to a lot of people, and I've experienced it myself. They have a day when they've been ill, and then you have a day. Oh, Mark, oh, John, I haven't seen you for anything. Wow, I think you were given that good day as a way of being a good memory.
I do too. Yeah, and I had a couple of near-death experiences myself, and one in particular was pretty extensive, and yeah, they were beautiful experiences. But I think that we learn a lot about, and this is one of the, we were talking about the course of study. One of the things I include in there is this lengthy set of videos, which is literally hundreds of videos of different people telling their near-death experiences. And part of the reason for that is because everyone's near-death experience contains within it unique information, and this is kind of how we get to know God. When we want to get to know somebody because we want to be friends, you want to get to know them. And we get to know God by listening to what some of his friends have to say about him and what they've experienced of him. And that's what, listening to other people's experiences does for us. Ironically, that's also what, reading the ancient sacred texts and learning about what some of God's friends have learned from God, shared about God, and experienced of God for the last 5,000 years or so or longer. You know what I mean? So that's part of what that does, is because it gives us this much grander picture of who God is, so we feel like we're getting to know him as as we are learning these things, as well as, gathering these keys of the secrets of, these great souls who wrote down these great keys, the mysteries that they discovered shortly before they were going to ascend out of this realm for the last time, which is very valuable. I always call it gold, when you have some type of spiritual knowledge that's bequeathed to you or bequeathed to all of us. I call that gold.
That's nice. Now, I was going to mention some of your books, but I definitely wouldn't have enough time in the podcast. But I'm going to mention the latest book, because I think that's fair enough. The Christ of Redemption, the leg, the balance, the weight, and the volume, mechanics of spiritual warfare and angelic alteration. As a soul meanders through the spiritual life, it is inevitable that the periods of persecution will come into their perimeter. The tome engages the reader to understand the mechanism by which spiritual warfare is confronted by heavenly powers within the soul, and about how the alteration, the systematic matter, must occur to order to have a lasting peace. The Christ of Redemption is an experimental commentary of the works of Jacob Boehme, I don't know if I got that right, history's first mystical theologian Dionysius, describing the mechanism by which God brings transformation from heaven to earth within the soul of humankind. Vicariously, the reader will follow the road to the flower garden sutra of Malahara Buddhism. As you follow this path, their words become even more clear and understandable, and the mechanism becomes a tangible, through way that the seeker can follow, following through the dangerous world where spiritual warfare has entered into the physical realm, and energetic alteration is the only venue of transcendence. This book will teach you how to move properly through the warfare and into the peace that transcends all understanding, even when others are not walking the same path. Whew.
You know what's exciting about that book, The Christ of the Redemption, is it's really taking some of the fathers of mystical theology, Jacob Boehme and Dionysius. You know, Dionysius truly being the first Catholic mystical theologian. Very significant mystical writers in our history, and from very different eras. Dionysius and Boehme being about 700 years apart, but yet their words and their works being so intricately interwoven, as well as my own experiences, and taking the reader into this understanding of how transformation actually occurs from the above to the below. It's very hard to put into words, but I tried very hard to do so.
Well, it's never easy.
Mystical book, yeah. I'm sorry, what?
I said it's never easy to put the subject you're passionate about sometimes in words, because sometimes you think it doesn't. It's all like everything. Sometimes you can speak a word, but when it's written, you think, well, that doesn't make sense.
This book is it's definitely an adventure where you're taking three eras of mysticism and combining them in a way to really teach that path of spiritual warfare and energetic alteration, which is how we actually transform our lives, how we actually enter into purification within our own souls, how we actually make it actually occur. And that's what makes it powerful. You know, for those who are just beginning, though, who might be listening, I always recommend two books of mine for beginning people. Come to Wisdom's Door and The Mysteries of the Redemption. And at the site, there is instruction as well to which books to follow. Also, in the course of study, there is a downloadable resource guide that contains a whole bunch of mystical theology works for reading, but it also has an explanation of what I recommend to readers in terms of what is the best order of my books to read in and get the best outcome and result and to understand it the best. You'll see that there are several different series of books on the site. And with most of those, if you follow them in sequence, like the Mysteries of the Redemption series, and then there's going to be other series that are experiential. But with Come to Wisdom's Door, that's part of the how-to series. And if you just, after you read Come to Wisdom's Door, you just follow on with the next book, because there's about 9 books in that series, and each one goes a step deeper into how to have out-of-body experiences. It takes it up a notch with each one, and it gets pretty intense. Well, once you hit the hammer of mysticism and the fragrance of the mystical rose, then each one, it's going into some really interesting stuff. But you're getting a lot of important starting up information in Come to Wisdom's Door, and out-of-body travel and mysticism, and there's another one called out-of-body experiences, which sets you up really well for beginning that journey, and then these other ones are going to take you deep.
Well, as always, and I always say this to every people, I always have a fascinating conversations, and then the time just goes by like a blink of an eye. So,
this has been so fun.
And also, could you mention where people can go and find you? Because obviously, it'd be nice for people to think, where can I find your books?
That's a good idea. Yeah, it's at outofbodytravel.org. It's the Out of Body Travel Foundation. My name is Marilynn Hughes. You can look me up. I'm Marilynn with 2 N's at the end. Also, my email's at the site. You have any questions, just send me an email. I answer all the questions that come to me. So outofbodytravel.org. If you have any trouble navigating this site, pop me an email and I'll let you know where to find what you're looking for as well.
And also, before I go, I usually like to do a unique sign-off. So, Marilynn, what would be your unique sign-off?
My unique sign-off? How about the Out of Body Travel Foundation, traveling at the speed of light?
Oh, I like that. That could be a title for another book. Please put me a mention if you do write that book to say I gave you the idea. No, it's right. Right, here's mine for you, Marilynn. Now, I learnt along the way that I must have an out-of-body experience someday. I will learn how to seek and try to seek it out. I probably had one, but the door was shut and I was left out. So I'm going to seek and learn and study and hope one day to meet her on the astral plane, where we can play some table tennis and pass the time away. Perhaps he doesn't want to play table tennis, so perhaps he might want to walk the dog. But who knows?
I would love to walk the dog, and I have the perfect dog for it right here.
And I'd like to thank you for being on my show. And good.
Well,